My name is Jay Beckner. I'm president of Mertz Gilmore Foundation and proud board member of Philanthropy New York. So I'd like to welcome everyone here today. This wonderful session that we have. Philanthropy New York did a series of programs last year on civic engagement, and we're excited to be launching this season with today's program. As many of you know, we do have an election coming up. The first thing, there's today's session, which we'll get to in a minute. But I also wanted to remind everyone there's another session coming up on September 20th called Money in Politics, the impact of the Citizens United on the 2012 presidential election. So if you haven't seen information on that, you should look for that on the website. That one begins at 8:30. And today, let's see, this session, as I said, is sponsored by Philanthropy New York and co-sponsored by Media Impact Funders, which is Vince Stehle's organization. And before I turn it over to Vince, I just wanted to say the last time I introduced Vince at one of these events, it was Vince and I in a room with 65 women. And I was amazed I didn't realize Vince had this kind of star power, this kind of attraction. Kevin Bacon was in the room too, I forgot to say that. But I don't think that was it. So anyway, I'm turning it over to Vince now. And,
thanks very much, Jay. Thanks, Jay, and everyone here at Philanthropy New York, especially program director for these types of events, Vita Jahedi, who leads the team in constructing great programs day in and day out. And this is really, I think, the kickoff for the season, so we're very excited to have this program. And just also thanks to our co-sponsor for this event, PACE, Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, for helping to promote this event. Thank you, PACE. And just a quick word about the organization I run, Media Impact Funders, which is a new name for grant makers in film and electronic media. We set our goal to change our name before the last roll of film was sold, and I think we just made it. We, at Media Impact Funders, we believe that media and communications technology can have a transformative impact, whatever your philanthropic purpose, and we seek to collaborate with other philanthropic organizations, such as regional associations and affinity groups. So we hope that you reach out to us in constructing these kind of events, and certainly no more exciting than the conversation we're going to have today. You know, what a great way to kick off the season here. The 2000 election with MSNBC's Chris Hayes, Power Tools to Build a Better Democracy, sort of the Bob Vila of the digital civic engagement crowd. Thanks also to all of our panelists, Aron Pilhofer from the New York Times and DocumentCloud, David Moore from the Participatory Politics Foundation, Heather McGee from Demos, and Chris Hayes, our moderator for the discussion today. But thanks especially to Chris for coming down on an incredibly busy day in a broadcaster's schedule to share his thoughts with us today. I truly feel that he runs the most intelligent conversation on TV today. If you can't get up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday or Sunday morning, set your DVRs. You really ought to tune in, and I'm sure it's going to be just like that here today. Chris has also written a fascinating new book, Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy. I think it's particularly relevant, I think, for organizations in philanthropy. In it, Chris notes just how just about every major elite institution has failed in some spectacular fashion in recent years, resulting in a tremendous decline in the faith and trust of average people in the bedrock institutions of our society. So far, philanthropy has managed to steer clear of the kind of scandals and massive failures that have undermined other institutions. But we are, of course, concerned about the health of democracy in particular, and we need to be working to equip people with the tools they need in a digital age to be more effective citizens. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Chris will moderate our discussion here in the room, and we want to make sure that it is a very interactive conversation with contributions here in the room, where we will have a microphone that will pass around to anyone who's speaking, but also via Twitter, whether you're here or elsewhere. We've got a hashtag, which is hashtag PNY event. Hopefully you'll use that. And this program is being live streamed. So we really want to make sure that everyone in the room uses mics so that everyone who's experiencing this event elsewhere can fully appreciate what is being said. If Chris were to have a performance anxiety nightmare about his television program, which I'm sure he does not, this is pretty much what it would look like. No lights or sound or makeup, and a single out-of-focus camera capturing the program at a distant angle. But there would certainly be a plate of pastry on the table, uneaten, as far as I can tell. Is it plastic?
No, they're real.
They're real. And still, it would be the smartest conversation on TV, and we're sure it will be true today. Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks for the pastries, which I will refrain from. I thought I would speak just briefly at the beginning about sort of the main theme of the book, and also the way I think it relates to the election and the way it relates to thinking about the kinds of work that both David and Aron have done specifically in this space. There's this line that's, I think, becoming quickly infamous in this election, which was a statement spoken by a spokesperson for the Romney campaign in response to the media response to Paul Ryan's nominating speech at the Republican National Convention. That speech, which received quite a bit of pushback in the press, not just the kind of left progressive press, but the so-called mainstream media, through this new institution of fact checkers, which has been a fascinating trend to watch develop. The Ryan speech had about 8 or 10 places that were aggressively and ostentatiously misleading, preposterously exaggerated, deceitful through omission. I'm coming up with because there were very few actual frank lies, but there was a tremendous amount of disingenuousness and misdirection. And a lot of the response to the speech, and I think it was kind of an interesting watershed moment, a lot of the response to the speech were mainstream fact-checking organizations and the fact-checking arms of mainstream media entities like, say, the Washington Post, calling these out. And so right just prior to that, a similar thing had happened with the Romney campaign in regards to an attack that they have made front and center in their campaign, which has to do with a waiver, state waiver. You guys are probably all familiar with this, having to do with TANF, or the welfare reform signed by President Clinton in the 1990s, a waiver that the Obama administration has granted to states that promise to experiment and innovate ways to move people to work unencumbered by some of the bureaucratic restrictions that currently exist in the law. The Romney campaign has seized on this to accuse the president and his administration of, quote, gutting welfare reform, essentially cutting checks to the indolent succubi who are taking the tax-paying good dollars of the hardworking and virtuous taxpayers of America. And this claim has also been rather thoroughly debunked as an outright lie. And I think that one's fair to call quite clearly a lie. There was a comment made by one of the Romney spokespeople in response to this sort of avalanche of fact-checking when they said, "We are not going to allow our campaign to be dictated by the fact-checkers." And I thought that was a really fascinating statement for a number of reasons. One, it perfectly identified what is a core tension in American public life, public discourse, political conversation, which is the question of who has authority to say what is what. That's a very basic and in some ways profound epistemic question about how citizens in a democracy interact to the mechanisms of self-governance, how they acquire information to inform themselves on how to react to things that are said in public life. And that statement was dropped into an atmosphere that I spend some time chronicling in the book, which is what I call the crisis of authority in American life. what we have seen in the last decade is a cascade of institutional failure, incompetence, and corruption. And it has produced a very clear result in polling, both as reflected in the General Social Survey and in Gallup and in Pew, in which Americans have historically low levels of public trust in our pillar institutions. And that historically low levels of public trust in our pillar institutions is in relation to the early 1970s when the polling started. Said polling precipitated by the end of Vietnam and Watergate, at which point in time pundits were decrying the historically low levels of public trust in institutions. In fact, empirically, that was the high watermark of American public trust in institutions. It is now at the lowest point. It is at a nadir in the wake of what in the book I call the failed decade. So you have essentially three things happening right now when you think about how does a citizen navigate the basic function of acquiring information about what is happening in public life, responding to it, informing opinions about that information, and then using said information to interact with the political system in the kind of closed loop of feedback that is the basic engineering setup of a democracy. There's three things happening. The first is the crisis of authority, okay? When you have traditional sources of authority are not trusted, you unmoor everyone from the essentially epistemic anchors that keep us grounded. Rush Limbaugh, on one of his programs, called the media, academia, government, and science as the four corners of deceit. He said, these institutions exist solely by deceit. And I want you to take a moment to imagine dispatching the duties of citizenship while discounting everything, every bit of information you heard that came from media, academia, government, or science. In the same period of time in which this crisis of authority has happened, we've seen this sort of balkanization in the media. Walter Cronkite every night spoke to more people than all three evening network newscasts now combined. There is a diffusion of audiences. This is just an empirical fact about audiences, right? No broadcast ever will ever get as many people as Walter Cronkite's evening broadcast again. And the same is true for anything that was ever broadcast before. Those numbers are never coming back. They're never coming back. There's just too many options. This diffusion in the audience, which is happening in all kinds of non-political realms, right? People have all sorts of different comedies and dramas they can watch. They don't just have three networks. There's not just two big papers. It's happening in the political realm in a very specific way, in which that balkanization is overlaid on a map of red and blue ideological polarization, okay? So people can exist in universes of information that are entirely geared towards producing confirmation bias, telling people more or less what they want to hear. And these exist on the left and the right. They are more pronounced on the right. But they have the effect. Glenn Beck is a perfect example. Glenn Beck has now created an entirely hermetically sealed world of information. He has now a media empire since he's left to Fox called The Blaze. There's a Glenn Beck show, and then there's a Blaze. And the Glenn Beck show, Glenn Beck will go on the Glenn Beck web show, and he will cite reporting from The Blaze, which is a Glenn Beck enterprise. Every citation and link links to some other part of the Glenn Beck media empire. All of the information in the self-contained universe exists in the hermetically sealed world of Glenn Beck's worldview. And you can pay money a month and exist solely within the information universe of Glenn Beck approved facts about the world. Okay? So we have the crisis of authority. We have the kind of diffusion of authority that's happening in terms of the diffusion of audiences in the media. And that is very worrying, that trend. And one of the reasons it's worrying, I'm going over already. No, I'm good. Okay. One of the reasons it's worrying is because there's a great book that won the Pulitzer Prize called The Race Beat, written by two reporters about basically white northern newspaper reporters covering the civil rights movement. And what's fascinating about the book, which I would recommend, it's a great book, is just the degree to which civil rights leaders in the South were very self-consciously aware of the power of the northern white press. And they strategically engineered things to cater to the northern white press and to convince the northern white press. And one of the things you come away with from the book is that they were successful and ingenious in doing this. And the massive change in public opinion that happened, particularly among northern white folks, on the specific narrow issues of things like the Civil Rights Act or the end to Jim Crow segregation, were produced by the kind of Archimedean point that was the moral authority and the central authority of the northern white press, right? It was this kind of bank shot, right? You could convince the reporters who were down in Selma that they were witnessing evil that the state was either tacitly backing or explicitly endorsing. And when that story made its way out to the audience, that audience was so large and so central, it could shift public opinion. The question is, in the environment that I've described above, in this environment of balkanization, right, is there any such Archimedean point to produce the level of social consensus necessary, to produce the level of social change necessary to deal with the challenges that we face, primarily, from my mind, climate, right? It's an open question when you rerun the experiment, right? Can you produce that level of social shift of opinion? Now, something like gay marriage suggests that it's still possible, right? Even in the absence of that kind of Archimedean point, we have seen a public opinion shift on gay marriage that is really quite remarkable and gives me hope. So those are the kind of dire elements of this story. The last part is the hopeful element of the story, okay? And this is where Dave and Aron's work comes in. As mechanisms of mediation diffuse, as the crisis of authority means people don't have trust, we also, at the same time, have this flourishing universe in which people have direct access to information. Now, you can't get rid of mediation altogether, right? I mean, it doesn't actually do the fact that you can now read every word in the Affordable Care Act is wonderful for a very small set of people, right? And they're then going to mediate. But the point is that the set of people who can mediate, who can tell you what's in the bill, is much, 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 much larger than it used to be. It's theoretically anyone on the internet. It's realistically a whole bunch of professionals and amateurs who are actually going to get it and sit down and read the thing. So in the absence, as this mediation attenuates, as it balkanizes, as it disperses, there's a vacuum that can be filled by the remarkable potential of the internet to empower people with direct access to the information they need on very basic things. What bills are currently sitting before Congress? When someone is having debate about said bill or the language of the welfare waiver, you can go and read it. I think we lose sight of how profound and revolutionary a change that is. Think of this. When you think about how social media has changed the average empowerment of your average citizen. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were a fairly well-regarded professor at Princeton University who wanted to organize people around some cause, what would you do? Post a flyer in the faculty lounge? I don't know, a phone tree? You guys remember phone trees, right? Call on a phone tree. Make conversation at a party, have a bunch of people to your house, right? Literally every teenager in Harlem right now has more instant access to more people to tell them about something than that Princeton professor did 20 years ago. 500 friends on Facebook, right? Even if they don't own a phone, they could use the phone. And so the hopeful part of this story is the radical transformation that can be represented by tools that fully leverage the unparalleled in human history amount of information to which citizens now have access, at the same time that the institutions that used to mediate said access decline in trust or diffuse in audience, right? And what's remarkable as the last hopeful part of this, and this speaks specifically to Open Congress, which I use and which my staff uses and which is a remarkable tool, is the Wikipedia principle of how much interest there actually is. I mean, you would think, well, who's going to read the Affordable Care Act? It turns out a lot of people. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of desire, and there's a tremendous amount of untapped labor, essentially, in doing this kind of nitty-gritty work of interpretation, of mediation, of sifting of information, of synthesis of information, that if you empower citizens to do, they will do, right? And that is the really hopeful part of the story that I think we tend to focus on the kind of declinist parts of it. But the really hopeful part of the story is the fact that this potential is only just beginning to be tapped. Only just at the very, very, very beginning. And in the places in which it has been tapped in the world of, say, Linux and open source, in what Wikipedia is being created, we have products, and more than products, fabrics of social interaction that are genuinely unparalleled in human history. All right. With that, on that grandiose note, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, right?
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate the kind words. That's very cool. And Heather, Vince, and Aron, it's great to be up here on stage. And thanks to Philanthropy New York. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to present our work. So I'd like to get to the web browser. I don't know if I can. Should I steer or should you? Oh, let me, if you don't mind, because I got my. Sure. I don't need that, I don't believe. So let me see if I can find my links here. Great. So to jump off what Chris was saying about something about declining trust in pillar institutions, congratulations, everyone. We're at a new low. We've hit a new low. Congress last month continued a pattern of declining to an approval rate of an all-time low at 10%. This is lower than the popularity of the British during the time of the American Revolution. It's lower than the popularity of British Petroleum during its oil spill, its awful oil spill. And it's lower currently than the popularity of the US going communist. So Congress is really a despised institution. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But I'm here to talk about how what we do with Open Congress addresses some of them. So I'm David. I'm the executive director of the Participatory Politics Foundation. We're a small 501c3 nonprofit organization with a mission to increase civic engagement. And we're a tiny web-based team. We're all based in different cities from SF, LA, Austin. And I'm based here in New York City. And we were founded in 2007. And we've created Open Congress as a free and open source tool for public knowledge about Congress. So that's what I'm going to be jumping into here in a second. So Chris mentioned healthcare reform. And if you're interested in healthcare reform, it's a big election issue. Of course, we're talking in part today about the election of 2012. And a big part of the discourse and the media coverage keys off of the healthcare bill. What's in it, who supported it, what didn't. So of course, when Chris mentioned healthcare, of course, in his remarks, then I was smiling because I knew that I had this tab up. But unfortunately, this is our government's attempt at information display of the healthcare bill. So this is the key piece of vital information, and it looks like an error screen. It looks like and I love the web, and I love sort of, nostalgic net nerdery, but this looks like the internet looked back in 1995, right? This can be massively improved upon. There's other reasons why, Congress has cratered in its approval rating. Ezra Klein, the journalist, cites a number of them, including increasing partisan gridlock, and just generally, this most recent 112th Congress has passed the fewest laws while it remains in session. Their popularity is down, so we could go on and on. We believe that this needs to be addressed. But if you search Google for the healthcare reform bill, this is another government website. This is officialhouse.gov document. And while this all is important that it's out there, and I don't think that they think that this solves the problem, this is just terribly not the information that somebody needs. For the first Google link, the idea of understanding that section 2742F is a reference to something else, this isn't helping individuals easily grasp the information that they need to make decisions and share with their online public networks. So in 2007, we created Open Congress, the free and open source public resource. And what was new about Open Congress when we created it was that it brought together for the first time official government information with news and blog coverage and campaign contribution information, which we think is really vital to get at the money behind it, who's paying for votes. And also with free public participation tools. So what we sought to build with Open Congress was a more user-friendly version of the official government website, Thomas, one that provided for public input. Some of the things that we pioneered when we originally launched the site was the ability to sort views by popularity, which is something that the official government website just couldn't do. And we had a more intuitive search function, basically, to let you find the bills that really mattered. So these are, for example, bills of, over the past month, the most recent, the most viewed bills on the site. And actually, Vince pointed out to me that the top one is HR 3, which came up recently in the reproductive rights issue, and Paul Ryan's co-sponsorship of it. We could go on and on. But here's our page for HR 3590, and you can see we seek to offer more contemporary web design and user experience. Now, we have pages for every bill, senator, representative, and other types of entities in Congress, but I'm just going to show you a bill page since that's primarily what we do on the site, and that's how most of the people find our way to the site. Here you can see the bill's official information, easily see its status, and see information about sponsorship and committees, as well as over on the side some social indicators of how many users support, oppose it, and how many views it has. It puts some things in context, which is really useful. If you scroll down, we have a nonpartisan real language summary, and you can get a sense of some of the organizations supporting and opposing. Easy links to news and blog coverage. We allow people to write letters to Congress, and you can see them handily there. And you can see a whole host of related information that we put right at your fingertips. And so what this allows people to do is, for the first time, easily learn about a bill and get the official information, but then we seek to walk our visitors up what we call a chain of engagement. And the idea is that they can learn about a bill, they can track the bill status, they can share a bill, then they might be moved to comment on a bill, and then they might be moved to write a letter to their representative or make a phone call or attend an in-person meeting, and eventually organize their communities around the bills and issues that we care about. So that's what we seek to do with Open Congress. I should mention also, by the way, that since 2007, the Sunlight Foundation in Washington, D.C. has been the founding and primary supporter of Open Congress. So here we also have pages for every member of Congress, of course, including Senator Schumer. You can see his campaign contributions sorted by, where he receives his money. And this we bring in with money with information from OpenSecrets.org and MapLight.org and other. And also, I should mention, DoveTrack.us is the provider of our legislative information. So we're working in a whole open source, open data landscape, and we're really proud to be part of that. All of our data and tools are open to everyone. So in 2009, we launched a feature set called My Open Congress, which was just basically social networking for Congress. We were the first site that let you create a personal account totally for free, track the bills that you're watching, track the people who you're watching, track the issue areas that you care about, and just sort of have a little personal hub of everything you're trying to interact with on the internet. Then last year, in 2011, we launched what we called Open Congress version 3. And this is making the crucial step of taking information from just pure transparency into action, into engagement, and allowing users to organize more on our site with direct access to all the information we bring together. So this is our message builder interface for the ability to find your members of Congress easily, so just by entering your zip code, and then bringing over information into what we call the message builder about who supports the bill, what you understand about it, who supports, who opposes it, and all the money behind it. It's a really key tool, we believe, for allowing people to write informed letters to their members of Congress and organize around it. Since 2007, Open Congress has grown quickly to become the most visited not-for-profit website in the US or in the world for tracking Congress. We've had up to 1 million visits a month, so we've had some great popularity. Our next step with Open Congress is to bring this model of user-friendly engagement with government to government at every level. We're currently in the process of working to bring it to state legislatures, and that's on our new website, opengovernment.org. So we have 6 states up at opengovernment.org right now with information from Sunlight Foundation Open States Project, and we seek to roll it out to more states soon. And also, we'll be making a formal announcement soon, but in partnership with the Knight Foundation, we're seeking to expand open government to cities. So we're looking to bring this open government model everywhere, and right now, with more resources, we'd be able to bring it more places faster as a free public resource. So besides all the traffic we've received, which is pretty remarkable, since 2007, we've received 25 million visits and 62 million page views, which is pretty massive. for a site with only the equivalent of 2 full-time employees. That's an average of 4 million visits a year, or 11 million page views a year. So we're doing traffic that's comparable to some pretty major media websites all in a shoestring. Our peak traffic was the healthcare reform bill in August 2009. We received over 1 million visits a month. Also in 2010, we received a real bump when people used Open Congress to organize around this specific issue of unemployment insurance. And this is an article about 3 bills on Open Congress that received over 50,000 comments apiece by people who were trading information and sharing information with their social networks. And this became a lifeline for people who really desperately needed this information but couldn't get it from the official sources. And this is all organic. It happened totally driven by users. And we just set up a wiki project to allow people to do more. And then another success I'd like to cite to support our model is this past January, the debate about 2 bills called SOPA and PIPA, which would have had really negative implications for net neutrality, and especially SOPA, which would have worked ostensibly to, it was an online censorship bill, basically. It would have allowed the government to take down any website without due process. It would have broken Open Congress. So in partnership with a huge coalition of folks, and included a lot of great groups, like won't even mention here, we organized as part of American Censorship Day to stop SOPA. And Professor Yochai Benkler of the Berkman Center at Harvard did an extensive study of how information funneled between different news organizations and entities during this debate, and found that Open Congress was a great hub of information. I'm really looking forward to talking, to taking any questions. I'm going to just close with one segment from Chris's book, which I think is relevant to our work, which is that so Chris in Twilight of the Elite wrote, the most important social project we must undertake in the wake of the failed decade is reconstructing our institutions so that we once again feel comfortable trusting them. Because without the social cohesion that trusted institutions provide, we cannot produce the level of consensus necessary to confront our greatest challenges. And I think that what PPF and DocumentCloud are doing is a big part of that. So I look forward to talking more. Thanks.
Hey, Aron, I just want to say one thing before Aron starts, which is at the federal level, you can read the Affordable Care Act, even you can find it even if Open Congress didn't exist. At the state and city level, it's just as likely you just actually can't get it. I mean, it's possible there's a bill, if you're living in Texas, that is going to allow construction of, or going to move some land into auction to be auctioned and have oil drills on it, and you can't see that language. I mean, the place in which all of the amazing stuff that's happened at the federal level, which has allowed this kind of citizen participation to happen, is not the case at the state level, and that is happening at the same time that state and local news are being devastated by what's happening in newspapers. So there's this tremendous vacuum at the state and local level that I want to emphasize in terms of the importance of moving this model down the chain. When in fact, it's more important down the chain than it is at the federal level. Sorry, Aron.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I spent my first 15 years as a print journalist mostly doing political reporting, and I was in the State House in New Jersey, which used to be the largest State House press corps pretty much in the country, and it is virtually vanished. The Star-Ledger is a shell of its former self. Bergen Record used to be an amazing newspaper. It's still good, but it's nothing like what it is. And especially in a state like New Jersey, which has no incumbent television broadcast networks at all. I mean, they have NJN. That's pretty much it. It's really frightening, I think, what's happening on the state and local level. I could not agree with you more. And anyway, so I am Aron Pilhofer. I'm editor of Interactive News, the New York Times. Like I said, I have a print background, but I've also been a nerd, and proudly so, for most of my life. I've always done sort of data analysis, and more recently sort of gotten into programming. And I really, in some ways, wasn't quite sure why DocumentCloud fit into this, but after hearing both David and Chris, I totally understand it. Although DocumentCloud,
We're relieved.
yeah. I should have trusted. It's once again, it's the media. You can't trust anybody. So first, let me tell you how DocumentCloud happened and where I think it fits in this discussion a little bit, and then I'll run through. I was going to do a live demo, and then Of course, I realize that live demos are disasters waiting to happen, so I'm just going to show you some screenshots instead. But so DocumentCloud was sort of the brainchild of myself and two employees of ProPublica, which is an investigative reporting organization based here, a nonprofit based here in New York. Scott Klein and Eric Mansky. And it dates back to the team that I run and founded at the New York Times, which is a technology team. But we're a technology team based in the newsroom doing news-based projects. So I'm bringing programmers into the newsroom to try to redefine what it is to tell a story, getting away from this idea that as I think it was Jeff Jarvis who said, that the atomic unit of news is still a bylined news story. To move away from that idea and think about new forms. And in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to take these sort of new ideas and transform them on the web, you have to own the means of production. You have to be able to actually produce these things on the web. And frankly, that's one of the areas that most news organizations have not invested. They have big IT staffs, but they don't have folks like my team, teams like mine, to build these sorts of things. Well, DocumentCloud came out of a project that we built when the Clinton Library released 17,000 pages of Hillary Clinton's schedules during the primary season leading up to the 2008 election. 17,000 pages. They released it on a Friday afternoon. They released it in a PDF format, but of course these were not searchable PDFs. These were the image kind. And so how did most news organizations handle that? They helpfully linked to them. If they linked to them at all, they helpfully linked to them from their website so that you, the reader, can download 17,000 pages of, now some news organizations broke them up so you could download them in smaller chunks, but still. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. We built a tool, knowing this, we built a tool on deadline, 24 hours. We built a tool called Document Viewer, which now is sort of, you'll see what that looks like in a minute. It's been adapted to DocumentCloud. But the idea was, you know, these are documents that are important. These are documents that are newsworthy. And we shouldn't, as journalists, we shouldn't just write about them. We shouldn't just read through them and write a story and then just hope, you know, you guys trust us. We should show you exactly why we're saying what we're saying. We should be able to point you exactly to the section of the document that says why we're saying what we're saying. And you then should be able to see the document yourself and say, hey, are we telling the truth? Is this right? So DocumentCloud, stemming from that, the idea of DocumentCloud was really about transparency. But I'm not talking about the kinds of transparency that we normally talk about. In this case, it's government transparency. You hear a lot about that. What you hear very little about is journalistic transparency, showing your work. And journalists are really bad at that, by the way. We are trained pretty much from day one not to be transparent about what we do. And there's some good reasons for that, to be honest. You can be sued very easily for being too transparent. But journalists by nature are not, for that reason, sharing and caring people. We may be, actually that's not true. We may be caring, but we're not very often sharing. We gather documents. Documents are the lifeblood of journalism. We gather them. We get them on our desk. We'll sit down with a yellow legal pad and a couple of markers. We'll mark them up. We'll pull out what we want. We'll write our news story, and guess what happens? Those documents get put into a box. They get shoved under a desk. A layer of dust gathers, and that's the end of it. Or worse, we get a big document dump from a government agency or something like that. They always happen at 5 o'clock on Friday. There's a reason for that. Because nobody reads a Saturday paper. So we get them at 5 o'clock on Friday. It's on deadline. You got to get it in. So what do? You take a little pile. You hand it out to 5 other reporters in the newsroom. Did you guys know this is how this happens? This is how this happens. This is how journalism is made. We hand it out to 5 or 6 reporters in the newsroom. You go through as quickly as you can. You grab whatever you can out of those things. You write a news story. And then guess what else happens? That document gets boxed up, gets put under your desk. That layer of dust gathers, and it's never seen again. We think that's tragic for a lot of reasons. So we wanted to build a tool that allowed journalists to be transparent and to allow those documents to have a life beyond the single news story. So here are some of the organizations that are using it. This is actually kind of an old slide. This would be much bigger if we were to list all of them. We're in about 600 newsrooms right now. We launched about 2 years ago. About 600 newsrooms. We have about 5 million pages of documents, about 350,000 documents. Right now, the majority of them are public. available, searchable. Anybody can go to DocumentCloud.org, search through our document collection, and pull them out. So what is DocumentCloud? First, it's a tool for analysis. This was kind of the hook. This is the idea, right? We're gonna offer you the carrot to get you, the reporter, to be a little more sharing on the front end. So instead of saying to the reporter, hey, you're going to sit with your pile of documents with your magic marker and your yellow legal pad, you're going to spend hours upon hours sitting on the floor, putting them in piles, organizing them, we're going to give you a better tool for that. We're going to bring this into the 20th century. We're the 21st century, maybe, if we're very good at this. We are going to give you a tool to actually do real document-based analysis. So how does that work? You can scan your documents, or if they come in some kind of electronic format, and you can upload them to our DocumentCloud repository. So now here you can see this is a project. This is a commercial appeal project they did a couple years ago about Ernest Weathers. You can now have your documents stored in this sort of electronic format. You can see that these documents are now searchable. You can actually annotate your documents. You can create little notes. That's what that little yellow thing is right there. You can go through your document. You can, using sort of a drag and drop, you can create a little note for yourself. We do OCR. So if your document comes like the Hillary Clinton documents did, they come in that sort of image form, we will actually scan them and provide searchable text for you. That alone is, frankly, a piece of technology that 99% of newsrooms lack, if you can even believe that. You know, buying a copy of Adobe Acrobat Pro is about, for $400 and some, whatever it is. That is probably the power tool of most newsrooms, if they have any capability to do this at all. So this was literally the biggest feature that DocumentCloud, sadly, sort of provided. We do entity extraction. This is a feature that does not scale, as it turns out. We had this sort of hockey stick growth pattern. We grew in a nice sort of even way for about 6 months, and then suddenly, boom, it spiked. And so we are having that sort of growing pains of any sort of startup. So right now we're sort of suppressing it and we're working through it. But you can see how this theoretically could work. This is another killer feature. You take your document, you send it to us, we go through it, we look for people, places, entities, organizations, and we will uniquely identify them. So here, this is a search for the U.S. Coast Guard, and you can see you can see what DocumentCloud will find. It'll find U.S. Coast Guard, USCG. That's incredibly powerful. Suddenly now you're able to make connections among documents using something more powerful than just a simple text search like you do in Google. You know what you get back if you search for a person's name in Google. Is it the right person? Who knows? A common name? Forget about it. DocumentCloud, we rely on a service called OpenCalais to do this. DocumentCloud will provide these entities. We're working on this component to try to do some more some more visualization, to do some more advanced sort of clustering, and some more visual ways of shifting and searching through documents. Actually, there's a project, another night project called Overview, that has taken this to a has taken this idea and really run with it, where you can use some incredibly advanced searching and analysis using DocumentCloud as a back end. We allow sharing. I won't get into this. So you can have reporting teams from within your organization sharing a group of documents. And this, for example, we used during the last trove of WikiLeaks, which is all about, you know, the Guantanamo detainees. That was that last trove of documents. We were sharing that across 2 news organizations, 3 continents, and a reporting team of probably 16 people using DocumentCloud. The annotation features. Here you can see a public note. So once again, what is the use to somebody from a reporter's point of view? If I'm just going to dump the document online and say, hey, good luck, reader, I want to be able to do more than that. I want to be able to highlight what's important. And using sort of click and drag interface, you can create, see those little yellow things? Those are annotations. That's what it looks like when you expand an annotation. So on the bottom there, this is important. Your reporter can actually explain a little bit about what you're reading here. So if there's any jargon or anything in there that you can't necessarily, that a normal reader wouldn't necessarily understand, or a lay reader wouldn't understand, you can explain that. And then finally, we make it super simple for reporters to publish this stuff. It's literally it's literally like a wizard. You click, 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 click. You get a little bit of embed code. It's like a YouTube video. That's really how easy it is. You take a little code, you drop it on your website, and there's your document. And surprisingly, this has really worked. As I said before, reporters actually, we didn't know that this would work, to be honest. I mean, we three were reporters, so we know how possessive reporters and journalists can be with their stuff. But actually, as it turns out, the reason they weren't doing it is that there weren't any simple tools out there that did the kinds of things that journalists need in order to get to the point where they're willing to share their documents. And once we did this, once we created this, suddenly, like, the world opened. Here's just some examples: Texas Tribune, New Yorker. If I had a more recent slide, I think the proudest moment for me was when the Supreme Court ruled on the Health Care Act. And of the top 10 newspaper websites, 8 used DocumentCloud, which was amazing to me. That and NPR also used it. I don't know what the other 2 were thinking, but we need to work on that. So I guess just to cap this off, I think where this fits, this is sort of, I think, an indirect way of getting, of bringing that sort of democratization of information to people. Journalists are gathering these documents every single day. This is what we're doing. This is what we do. And now we're making these things available. We're putting them up there. We're giving them out to whoever needs them, whoever wants them. We're putting them out in ways that people can understand. We're explaining to the best of our ability why we think this is important. And we're citing our sources in ways that we've never done before. Here's an example, the Do No Harm. This is a series that the Las Vegas Sun did. Here's a news story you can see online where they've wrote about the tension in an email, and you can link directly into the spot in the document where that's referenced. This could be a 20,000-page document. This happens to be 2, but this is the power of DocumentCloud. And so I guess I'll just leave it at there.
Spilling water for effect.
So that was actually perfect, because as Chris was spilling water, I was just going to say, in the nightmare of Chris's dream of the television program, he would spill his water, but there would also still be commercial breaks. And so we're going to have a commercial break now are we ready for that? And if you have the links at home on the live stream, it would be New Morning. New Morning. Got it. So if you were watching that program, you could use if you were watching that ad, you could say to yourself, really? Obama is trying to force gay marriage on the whole country? I thought I was already married. Not gay, something like that. But you might say, well, who actually was that was behind that ad? These sort of euphemistic names. So you could use a tool, a digital tool called Ad Hoc, Hawk the bird, which is a product of the Sunlight Foundation, which in addition to supporting Open Congress, has created lots of digital tools for 21st century effective citizens. And basically, it's a Shazam for political ads and allows you to identify that actually the Campaign for American Values is a new super PAC established by Gary Bauer, a longtime evangelist who has been a definite thorn in the side of Obama and the Obama administration. But you might ask yourselves, well, are there any anti-Romney ads along these lines too? So we're going to have another commercial break momentarily. And this one is called Understands, if you have the link at home. Right. So once again, you might ask yourself, well, who is Priorities USA, and where does their money come from? And again, if you're using Ad Hoc, which is a downloadable app for your phone, you can get it on Android, at Google Play, or on the App Store. You can find out that Priorities USA raised about $25 million. They've spent a lot of it already, and that it's a super PAC that's aligned with Obama, President Obama, and it's run by people who used to be associated with his White House and campaign. And so essentially, I think what we're saying here is that we're not hostage to our television sets, even if we live in a swing state, a battleground state, where it seems like it's just about the only thing on. These ads, we can delve behind the names, the euphemisms that they have for themselves, and find out who's actually funding them, where's the money coming from to some extent, and to get a little bit more information about the political ads that we're seeing. So I just want to say a few more things about this. This is, we're living in a remarkable time in our political history where the Citizens United decision, which I think probably many of you are all familiar with, and you'll have an opportunity to discuss further here on September 20th. There's going to be a whole program on that here, has essentially taken off the limits that big companies, unions, wealthy individuals have had and that may use now to sway elections. And analysis from the Wesleyan Media Project's political advertising analysis shows that since Citizens United took effect, presidential ads are running at about 70% of them are negative attack ads. And that Wesleyan Project, which was supported by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, among others, showed that compared with the same time, roughly at the survey point, only 10% of the ads in 2008 were negative. So it's a really remarkable impact of the new, fresh flood of money that was unleashed by Citizens United onto our political discourse. At the same time, it's become harder, particularly in some states, for many groups, students, minorities, elderly, to vote, to cast their votes. And so that's an issue I think that we also ought to be concerned with in philanthropy. There are many nonprofits working to help educate citizens on how to vote, and one such example is TurboVote. Do we have that linked up? TurboVote is essentially a tool set that helps you, wherever you are, to find the easiest path to information about voting. What are the rules, the requirements, wherever I am, whatever state I'm in, what documents do I need? Recently, they were endorsed by a little company called Google as part of its online voting guide for individuals to educate themselves. And now, at the same time, nonprofits, same time that every individual now has these tools, it's important to know that nonprofits also have a huge role to play in supporting their constituents, employees, clients, members, donors, supporters, whatever type of group that your nonprofit or the grantees that you support come in contact with. You have an opportunity to be involved in helping to educate them and to encourage them to cast their vote, to find out through TurboVote or whatever what it will take to cast their vote, and really to encourage these constituents to vote. Nonprofit Vote is an initiative which is organizing, and there I don't think we really need to go to the website, but you can go to nonprofitvote.org, which is essentially saying, with the million+ nonprofits that there are in this country, they reach hundreds of millions of constituents by every definition, and we ought to understand that it's important to support all of these initiatives. So those are just a few of the, I think, highlights of the tools and other efforts that are being undertaken in this area.
Heather, I want you to talk about your organization's namesake and how how it applies here.
Thank you so much for playing. Wonderful. So when I kept seeing this come up on my calendar, remembering that I had agreed to do this panel months and months and months ago, I did have moments of wondering, wow, we're not a technology organization. Why is it that we selected this panel? Maybe I have something to do with Chris, who's an old friend, had me pastries a number of times on the show. But I think it really does.
That's your choice. That's your choice. I don't offer.
So I think it really does have to do with the mission of my organization. So my organization is called Okay. My organization is called Demos, and as Chris's question suggested, that's not necessarily a seventh grade reading level name for many people. Demos, as I'm sure many of you know, is the Greek word for the people of a nation, and it is the root word of democracy. And so Demos, the organization, is an organization that is dedicated to creating out of this country of many people from many different roots, the kind of society that can really have a full and robust and inclusive democracy with really high levels of participation and voice and efficacy, and one where that democracy translates into the kind of policies that can ensure the kind of upward mobility that really give the meaning of citizenship some life. We work doing policy research and advocacy, communications and commentary to try to move ideas that are really powerful enough to transform the lives of everyday Americans through the full cycle of change. And when we're working on these issues of, on the one hand, democratic reform to make a more inclusive democracy, which typically speaking these days means getting big money out and getting people in, and on the other hand, working on issues of a more inclusive economy, rebuilding the pathways to a middle class that is vibrant and reflects America's great diversity, we're often challenged to really make sure that we're connecting those issues, to connect what makes political inequality the result of economic inequality and also the reinforcing cause of even greater economic inequality. And so when I think about all of these issues that have been presented by the panel today, I think about these questions of equity. So we know that political voice is more unequal in the US than in most comparable affluent industrialized democracies for a host of reasons. Here's a little set of figures around the median income for certain levels of political voice that I think is really helpful. The median household income in the country is about $44,000. The median registered voters' income is about $48,000. So we've gone from 44 to 48. The median campaign worker income is $56,000. So we're now $12,000 higher than the median household. The median campaign donor is $66,000. And then the donor of the median dollar, so the median dollar, the median contribution, that donor actually has an income of about $80,000. So from who is actually an American household, we're at $44,000, and we go up by about $10,000 at each step from voter to worker, campaign worker to campaign donor to really at the middle of the campaign donation. So I think it's important that we think about the way that we can use these tools to really close some of the political voice gaps in our country. And I think it's extremely important in this moment where we are politically. I was an early reader of the galleys of Chris's book, and I think it really helped focus for me what has been some of the great themes of our lifetimes of political change that have happened. And one of them is the juggernaut it feels. And I worked for some time in Washington, D.C., running our Washington office at Demos. The juggernaut it feels of institutions, organizations, trade associations, advocacy groups that have sort of become like barnacles on our democracy. There's one way to look at it where it's absolutely the way that, you know, a bill becomes a law is going through these groups, and it's giving a lot of the represented entities an incredible amount of power and voice in our democracy. It's educating staffers. It's making sure that fundraisers are stocked and backed and campaigns are funded. But it's also a way that really exacerbates the underlying inequalities and really ensures that when it comes to day-to-day policymaking, particularly in Washington, but as well at the state houses and local governments, the voice of those who are organized in these ways is so much louder than the voice of the unorganized. There's a great tome that has become sort of required reading for a number of the staff at Demos called The Unheavenly Chorus. And it goes through just an incredible amount of political science data about the changes in political voice and inequality in political voice over the past 30 or 40 years. And one of the findings has been that there has been just this watershed change in how many organizations are organized to express political voice in Washington particularly. Over the time period, which was I think 1986 to 2001, nearly twice as many organizations representing the private sector were added to the organizations that make part of the lobbying industrial complex in Washington, as there were unions, public interest groups, identity groups, and organizations representing and advocating for those who are economically disadvantaged. Overall, the number of organizations that are engaged in, as they call it, the pressure system, actually more than doubled between 1986 and 1981 and 2006. And the only type of category of organization that saw no increase over that 25-year period was unions. And we all know about the changes in business practices and labor laws and regulations that have really weakened the role of unions in our society. And I think that really brings me to, and I want to give a lot of time for comments and questions and interaction, but I think looking at the role of labor and what labor organizing and workplace organizing was able to do on just this question of mediation at a time when labor was very, very strong. If you were not a very educated worker at the periods of time in the post-war period, in the 1930s and 1940s, you got your political information, and not just your political information, but your worldview from the kinds of associations that largely actually were ethnically organized that were affiliated with your work, your labor, with organizing. That was importantly face-to-face education, face-to-face education that made all of these questions of, in some elements, foreign policy, labor regulations, labor management issues, really real because they came down to be applied exactly to the work that you did every day. And as I'm sure, is anybody in this room a member of a labor union now? Okay. So for this room, none of us is a member of a labor union currently. And I think it's important to just sort of take a minute and sort of reflect on how we get that kind of education, how our children will get that kind of education. Where will it come from? Will it come from the classroom? Probably not. Will it come from their increasingly unattached and contingent methods of work? If they're a freelancer, if they're a contract worker, if they're an independent contractor, will it come in any way through the workplace? Probably not. Will it come from watching these filtered but national and not at all personal sources, like your fantastic show.
It's going to come from the new class consciousness app, which is being developed as we speak. You guys should really look into funding that. It's like right on the
Great
iPhone,
idea.
and it's just got a little.
I think it will, in many ways, for the next generation, come from people's social media networks. And so the question is, how can we ensure that those social media networks become ways, like in its best historical moments, ways to really give true information, to create the kinds of political education that is essential for an engaged citizenry, an engaged American demos, but that has still some relationship to the truth, right? Because that's not actually a given. So I think that these tools that we're talking about today are really essential to bridging that divide and to making sure that the kinds of inequalities that we've seen and that are sort of the core, in my view, and Demos's view, the core challenge of our moment, really are able to be minimized through the tools that we have.
I want to throw this open to questions, but I want to ask one question first, which connects what you were just saying to the work that you guys are doing on the end there. Aron, you called yourself a nerd at one point, and proudly, yeah, as you should be. So when we think about, let me see how to formulate this question. This problem of political voice, which Heather laid out, which is a problem that kind of tracks along the problem of inequality, right? And there's certain socioeducational dimensions of that. Voting levels as you climb up the income scale, voting levels as you climb up the education scale, propensity to donate, ability to donate, involvement. I think there's a conception people might have that digital tools such as the ones that you two are developing, the constituency to use them are people that are already relatively empowered, right? So it's like, it's a constituency of nerds, and that constituency of nerds also maybe are giving money to OFA and are also, say, New York Times subscribers, which in and of it, the New York Times subscribers are a huge amount of people, but if you were to track where they are on this kind of spectrum of political voice, they would be towards one end of the distribution, I would guess. I don't have the data, but that would be my supposition. So I want you to sort of wrestle with that element of it, or persuade me that this project doesn't amount to essentially kind of a version of democracy that's like nerd vanguardism.
I think you can
Okay.
start when you start.
That's cool. That's a hefty and important question. My first take on it is that, first of all, we're already ahead of the status quo where we were by putting open data on the web and simultaneously working to increase access to information, whether that's through mobile devices or just increasing, bridging the digital divide. So that's a really important first step. A second angle is that we are like Open Congress I can speak to, actually 2/3 of our traffic comes from search, and a lot of it is first-time consumers of political information who are searching for phrases like Obama healthcare bill, and they're not searching for HR 3962. And I wouldn't expect them to. It could be, yeah. And how do we know? Because, well, okay, so there's a couple of aspects. You can do a few user surveys. You can judge by what actions they're taking on the site, how quickly they leave, and you can also judge by the queries. They're not lobbyists. Oh, some lobbyists do use the site, as do some House staffers and government employees and things like that. You can judge by the queries. This is in many ways a layperson's audience that we can tell from our Google queries that finds their way in. And we're seeking to engage them and give them information. And now there's a lot of work to do. I don't think we do that perfectly. I'll also say that what we're building right here, this isn't our vision. This isn't the sum of our vision of a participatory democracy. What I'm so excited about is how technology in so many areas is disrupting the status quo, and I use disruption in the positive sense. And so you can look at that in business, or look at the SOPA protests as an example of how a more activist and participatory democracy can come together and flourish in very decentralized and yet at the same time very networked ways. So I don't just want to put bill information online and like call it a day, go home and kick up my heels. I'm interested in new ways of constituent communications and new types of accountability, so that it's not just people who read political blogs who are coming to Open Congress, right? But what if, like Chris, you mentioned, social media in Harlem, right? What if it's the case that we could devise an open technological standard for ways to aggregate consensus, basically, out of what people are talking about, or just tracking, or what their gut reaction is to something, right? Where it doesn't have to be a comment on a section of a bill text in HR 3962, right? But it's something, it's a simple hashtag, or it's a simple link to a campaign that you're sharing among your friends. So this is the broader vision of participatory democracy that we want to build with free and open source technology, and then use that to get engagement and voter rates up to levels, as Heather was saying, that are more comparable with other advanced industrialized democracies.
So I guess I'd come at this question a little differently, because I don't think the idea of DocumentCloud is quite the same.
Right. Your design, your user is different.
Yeah, and so I think it goes back to where I started with transparency. I mean, if you look, all I can say is thank God for Congress, because if you did the same sort of Gallup, and this has been done, the Gallup poll about how people feel about journalists, and the news media, I'm not sure that generally speaking we're doing all that much better. Slightly higher, Yeah. But I don't think those numbers are necessarily going up. I may be wrong about that. If anything, they're probably hovering. But worse, I think that what's going on now is a sort of information explosion, right? What you were describing is the Cronkite. Back in the day, everybody watched Cronkite. Now, it's hard to kind of separate good information from bad. Everything, a good number looks like a number, a bad number looks like a number. And so the motive here was to sort of say, all right, we are an institution, New York Times is an institution, news in general is an institution. We want to walk this back. We have to be willing to be a little more open about what we're doing. And that results in the kind of authority that you're saying that we're losing, right? In this, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, to reconstitute it.
Exactly. And so it's not, I guess, on the nerd question, I'm not sure where, I wish I knew, really who is reading all these documents, because there's lots of them. We get about 1 million hits a week right now across all the we don't, it's a distributed network, so we don't have that kind of analytics, and we shouldn't.
Right.
But I would love to know. It'd be really interesting, because I would guess that it tracks pretty closely with, like you said, with the organizations that are in it. Now, DocumentCloud itself, which I didn't mention, but I probably should. I also didn't mention that it is funded through a generous grant from the Knight Foundation and Open Society, which I should also have mentioned, is a standalone 501c3. It's not part of the New York Times, not part of ProPublica. And that was important. So it is its own sort of neutral broker.
Let me take the indulgence of also arguing my own question, which is that there's also the cascade effects, which I think are important, right? I mean, one of the things that's amazing about the way social media works is that, like, the water cooler effect is intensely magnified by exactly this incredible increase in platform that people have. So the happenstance of one user finding themselves and getting a useful piece of information from DocumentCloud or from Open Congress, more and more it is not the case that just ends with that user and that user's conversation over the dinner table. It is likely diffused quite a bit. And in fact, the negative version of this, I wrote a whole story about the universe of paranoid conspiracy right-wing chain emails, which drive unbelievably incredible polling numbers on basic questions, basic factual questions. I mean, the most manifest was Barack Obama being a Muslim, which started as a right-wing chain email. And that there was no essentially mainstream news organization that was creating that. It was totally peer distributed wrong information. But there's the possibility, the promise, the potential that I think is exciting of the reverse, right? That the information that comes, that may originate in an annotation in DocumentCloud, that may originate from someone actually looking at the bill text of Affordable Care Act, becomes something that moves diffusely and is a positive version of the kind of insidious thing that we see in those kind of underground. So maybe we'll, please.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Here, can you get a microphone for this slide?
And I'm a relatively new program officer at the Ford Foundation on Transparency and Governance Issues. So I've been spending my time here thinking a lot about transparency. It's really been a terrific panel. And I have a quick question for Aron, and then one that I think is going to push, Chris, your question a little bit deeper. The quick question is on annotating in DocumentCloud. Can anybody go in and annotate?
Not yet, but that's next.
So now you have to be sort of a...
Well, the tool originally, I mean, we're taking this in baby steps, right? The original idea was we're creating a tool to help journalists become more transparent. We would love the world to be more transparent, but, you know, one step at a time. The next step is to turn those annotations into user-driven annotations. So think of it as sort of a crowdsourcing tool. That's the next step. Another piece of this, by the way, which I also forgot to mention, is like Open Congress, we are standing on the shoulders of and contributing to an enormous amount of civically minded individuals who happen to also be developers. And DocumentCloud itself is entirely open source. You can see every bit of code we've ever written. You can use it, you can grab it, you can create your own. So, you know, that's an important and democratizing piece of this too. But for now, it's just journal.
Although that actually gets to my sort of more thoughtful question, which is, what if you get a bunch of birthers who decide they're going to go in and start annotating documents, which really is beyond sort of, there's the nerd vanguard, and Heather ended up talking about how social networks are sort of, you know, where we go from here. But how do we know, Chris, you started out by saying, if I got your takeaway, which is we need something that brings us together rather than pushes us apart even further. And Heather, I think the danger with what you're saying is, to the extent we get documents off of DocumentCloud or whatever, and then we begin to go deeper within our own networks, how does this not take us further into a world where we're only using what we want and using documents selectively to reinforce our belief system?
So let me take a shot at answering that. I mean, I think one answer is there's no way to stop that. Motivated reasoning is a powerful force. And the internet empowers people to engage in incredibly powerful motivated reasoning. I'm serious. I mean, if you've ever fallen down the internet rabbit hole of a 9/11 chain of 9/11 truth sites, which I have done for hours on end at certain points in my life, it's that the internet allows that, and it gives a power to that. Two things I would say in this case. In both cases here, right? But in both cases here, there is a tethering to the original document, right? So that I think is key, right? Both of these projects are tethered in that the document is there, and if someone wants to quote it or annotate it in a manipulative way, there's other users who can actually see the document. And the same has to do with the Affordable Care Act, right? I mean, the bill language is the bill language. There is a thing that is the case, that is the anchor to all of this, ultimately. And then the second thing I would say, and I think one of the interesting lessons of Wikipedia, which kind of looms over all of this, is that scale is correcting, right? I mean, and that's, I think, the hope for all of this stuff is that it achieves a level of scale that makes systematic error difficult. And that's not necessarily going to happen, but that has been one of the things I think remarkable about the enterprise of Wikipedia. And it's true also with open source, right? I mean, scale is correcting is the same rule that applies there.
So let's interject on a sort of a peripheral point, but really important for funders in the room, is that DocumentCloud in particular, but also Open Congress, you know, they're recipients of grant support from the Knight Foundation, and in particular, DocumentCloud is one of the News Challenge grants. And so just recently, there was a very full evaluation of that class of News Challenge grantees, and DocumentCloud was held up as one of the exemplars of good practice and a particular attention on scaling. So that's just been released in recent days. And you should, if you want to learn, go deeper into the grant craft to see what's going on. There's a new Knight Foundation report.
Hi, Lori Bazala from the Hazing Foundation. So my question is sort of
building a little bit on the pushback about, isn't this sort of created for the privileged on some level? But it has to do with how people use these tools absent structures to build collective analysis. So, in my experience, when you look at how movements develop and create change on a large scale, there are structures that are developed, and often evolve organically through interactions. And maybe it's hard for me to think through how that would happen using these kinds of tools where people could do that in a collective way and build trust and relationship over time for sustained action.
Dave, will you talk about the 99ers?
I can actually.
Because
I was hoping I could take the first crack at that. That's a cool question, and it's a great opportunity to show some more of what we do. Is that cool, Aron? If I go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
If you have multimedia,
that's a great goal of the way we design and put our software, or that is to say, our websites out there as free tools for everyone to use. So we're interested in not just the transparency of understanding bills, but also enabling people to online organize in free ways, basically. And then our vision is one of coming together. It's really of greater public accountability, so that members really have to reckon with what their constituents are saying and what groups and networks of people are saying. The speech I mentioned earlier by Yochai Benkler discussing the SOPA event is a great resource for dissecting how these organic networks came together. But your specific question, I wanted to show you, this is the Open Congress Wiki. It's had thousands of contributors. We absorbed a previous wiki that was called Congresspedia. So this works just like Wikipedia, where we have volunteer editors overseen by a staffer editor. And we've got pages for every member of Congress. We've got pages for every state and what they care about. And one of the cool projects that we have is actually, this is Race Tracker. It's a crowdsourced list of every person running for every congressional seat and governorship in the country. But this is just one of the projects that we do. We also did an activist project called Free Thomas to try to get Congress to release its data in open formats. And I hope I can find the page to it earlier. I mentioned, here it is, Benefit Wiki. I mentioned earlier that just organically, there was unemployment extensions were being discussed in the summer of 2010 in Congress, a huge hot issue that was visceral to people's lives and families and of urgent economic support.
This is people that were going to expire. They call themselves the
Right.
99ers.
Right.
There was this, I don't know how much you know about this, but there was this remarkable organic organizing undertaking online. The name 99ers, there were 99er sites, and people began organizing around the fact that these were people who were long-term unemployed, who were about to get kicked off their unemployment.
And we noticed that our search engine ranking was going off the charts for the names of these bills, where people, I mentioned earlier, were coming to our comment forums and trading information and engaging in information, because the details of it, what happened about when you applied, if you were in Missouri, what sort of status you reported, all mattered tremendously. And we were able to, of course, we noticed that these pages were blowing up on our site. They were absolutely phenomenal amounts of traffic. Like I said, over 50,000 comments on 3 separate bills. That's incredible. So we, in addition to keeping those pages up and organizing them, we created this community project where volunteers came in. And you can see that there's a tremendous amount of information about the general benefits info. Here's what you can find. Here are people you can contact. This all happened organically in summer of 2010. And then state by state information about unemployment insurance in Colorado. And this is so for all 50 states. This grew. This is an example of what we're trying to build in Open Congress.
How does that lead to a movement that looks at the whole issue of, sort of social welfare through the lens of people who have had this experience? I mean, isn't that where you'd want to go if you looked at a real sort of civic engagement process?
That's a big and tough question. I view this as the first step.
No, but like, what could you imagine? I guess not
sure.
What is.
So here's what I can imagine. I can imagine a representative from Colorado who's up in the air or hasn't declared his or her position on this vote, having to reckon with the idea that 10,000 members of her congressional district, his or her congressional district, have signed a petition here saying, I'm following this issue, I'm staying informed through this person who's connected, and we know that you're also meeting with, say, Chamber of Commerce or something like that, right? Or we know that you're also meeting with these bank lobbyists who don't necessarily, who are generally influeing their campaign donations in ways that oppose this issue. We want you to, acknowledge that you've heard us and give us the same meeting time in your district office that you have for the lobbyists on this issue that affects our families.
Here's one other way that that I don't have to imagine that I know that was effective with this very issue of the 99ers is that existing advocacy groups for the unemployed were able to search engine optimize their own organizing, right? So the National Employment Law Project, there was, and I think continues to be, offline actual meetups of people, and that's where things get obviously a lot deeper.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, one response I would have to this is that the technology of, say, the meeting, which is an amazing technology, did not create the civil rights movement. But the civil rights movement would have been impossible without the technology of the meeting. Literally impossible, right? I mean, there was a form there that had been developed and changed in different ways and innovated upon iteratively over different social movements to create a process for decision making, right? A process for collective action that didn't have any content to itself, but you literally couldn't have done the bus boycott without the marathon meetings that are chronicled in some of the best histories of that era. And so there's a certain degree to which I think there's a kind of organic means by which you might envision tools developing over time in which they become necessary preconditions to the kind of organizing you're talking about, but I can't imagine ever being sufficient in and of themselves to produce.
I wonder if I could also just add a thought. In terms of sort of penetration into different demographic communities, which I think is part of what we're talking about, is your initial question of do we actually reach everyone who's underserved in some way with tools that are optimized for nerds and geeks from a higher class of a social class. So mobile is I think a relatively higher penetration, right? Mobile phones and such in communities that were on the other side of the digital divide. So we need to not just think of the web tools, but also repurposing them and delivering them on platforms that people actually use disproportionately, but also require funding for those levels of development.
I'd like to focus on Heather's remarks about the inequality, economic inequality, and how it relates to political inequality, and how that presents a huge barrier to our having a true democracy that we all want around this table. I spend a lot of my time in East Harlem, an awful lot of my time, and so I know the community fairly well. What I'm concerned about is the people who are under that $44,000 median that we talked about. Those are the people that I deal with all the time, and I'm concerned about them. My sense is, and I hope you have some data on this that will prove me wrong, but my sense is that those people do not have the equipment, they don't have the ability to navigate, and most importantly, they don't have the motivation to do the kinds of research that Open Congress and Cloud Document would enable them to do if they had the resources necessary. I'd just like you to comment on that.
Sure, I did refresh myself on the latest statistics around the digital divide before I came here this afternoon. So of those making less than $30,000 a year, according to a study this year by Pew, only 62% of households use the internet, as compared to 97% of those making over $75,000 a year. The income breakdown gets much more stark when we talk about people who use the internet at home or who have access at home, have broadband access at home. And again, there are policy ways to fix this problem, so this is not something we need to be completely despairing about, but it does mean we need to focus on it. Only 41% of those making under $30,000 a year have broadband access at home. However, I mean, I think this question of mobile technology is really, really important. The Pew study didn't talk about mobile technology, but we do know that young people and communities of color are much, much, much more likely to access the web through mobile technology. I think over 30% of Twitter subscribers are of color.
Yep.
Which is very surprising. And so there are ways, there are different, first of all, there are policies, we deregulated telecommunications at a time when telecommunications became extremely important. We have neither a free market with competitive costs, nor any kind of government oversight, nor a national broadband strategy. So we could fix that, obviously. And then we can also target some of these innovations. But that, I'm assuming, I'm not, I'll say this from my end of it, that I assume is quite expensive, would be to really make this, an incredibly effective mobile operation. Right?
My take on that is, you have to cover mobile, and you just try to cover as much as you can with the existing resources. Yeah, and I think mobile's tremendously important.
So there's more and more data suggests that mobile social media penetration among people in the cohort you're talking about, which is people with very low incomes, generationally is incredibly high. Incredibly high. And I think will continue to be. And I have a friend who's doing his sociology dissertation actually about the digital life of Harlem teens. And it's fascinating. And his experience there is the social media participation is 100%. It's all done mobily. And often on phones that are shared between 3 or 4 people. So people have their own handle, but phone service goes in and out, but people can log in on other people's phones. And so I think social media penetration on mobile is going to be essentially ubiquitous as this generation ages. Although any technology predictions are a fool's game. But.
I have a comment and question for our moderator, actually. So in the book, you talk about how Obama, the candidate, seemed to be insurgent and representing the kind of radical change, and that he was not going to be a defender of institutions, particularly as he ran a campaign that was so heavily focused on social media, using social media, and decentralizing and empowering citizens to engage. And I think that's a particular case, maybe a stark case, of what a lot of politicians go through, and that is, very open to your ideas when they're marketing to become, as a candidate to become a government official. But as soon as they become the government official, then the gates close, and they're not so interested in that. So to maybe address that dynamic, and also to suggest ways that we can reintroduce the sort of insurgent or democratizing role.
I have perhaps boringly conventional ideas on this, which is that, power never conceded anything without a demand. It never had, it never will. And that the tools, whatever tools, good government tools that any administration anywhere, no matter how noble in intent, will ultimately be fundamentally propagandistic undertaking. So, soliciting questions from people on Facebook, etc., all of which is perfectly nice, but is never going, just the nature of how power functions is never going to be actually any tool for any kind of, the ways in, you're right that the Obama campaign channeled, I think, a lot of exhaustion with traditional authority in the way that it organized its campaign, which was genuinely devolved down to a local level, was genuinely social in its approach, that genuinely took up a novel organizing method that had been imported from other spheres, community organizing, and some of the work Marshall Gans had done with the campaign, etc. And almost all of that, both the narrative critique they'd offered about the problem in Washington being fundamentally a problem of special interests and the breakdown and failures of democracy, and the methods of campaigning, which were also kind of radically new and small democratic. Both of those are largely gone from the way the administration is governed. But I also think gone in an unsurprising fashion because he's the president of the United States and is not going to be marshaling any big insurrectionist tools. So all of the potential, I think, in the kind of opening that we've identified here are openings that are going to come essentially against the resistance of the people in power if they're working.
If I could just offer one hopeful sign, or maybe a home for naive people, would be that there is a lot of work in the idea of open government. There was a particularly strong colloquium on this that the Aspen Institute hosted in early August at their Forum on Communications and Society. It really delved into the potential for open government. Maybe there's going to be a very high bar set by those who hold power, but at least I think there's more.
And there's obviously a huge, and there are a lot of people sympathetic to and advocates for open government within this government. I think that the key is kind of enshrining those in long-lasting policies.
Other questions from the Twitter feed? Anybody notice? Comments?
Anthony Simmons from the Schott Foundation for Public Education. This is a great conversation, but what I mostly hear are things that are on the national or federal level. And I'm curious to know if there are any sort of hyper-local tools that are being developed. For instance, here, a lot of stuff moves through the city council without your average, particularly your under $40,000 citizen actually knowing about.
Or anyone, actually.
Right.
I mean, let's start with anyone on that problem.
And even sort of this race tracker thing, which I think is great. It would be awesome if it were on a state or certainly a city level. So is there any sort of movement about developing some of these tools here?
So DocumentCloud is not a national tool. It's being used by 600 newsrooms. As you know, there are not 600 national newsrooms. That we have tiny little operations, medium-sized news organizations. It's really just, and we have actually individuals who are just bloggers among the 600. So we see documents from everywhere, local, national, state, you name it. So.
And so that's where we're headed with our next project, which is, it's called Open Government, and we're taking the Open Congress model to state legislatures and then to city councils, and then we would love to go as hyperlocal as we're able to. So in one way, there's resources, but then in another way, our code's already open. So you can grab our tools, right? But sometimes what you're missing is the other side of the equation, and that's data. And sometimes governments aren't releasing their data. So there's a lot of good folks doing work on this, and we're really part of the advocacy around this. The new nonprofit Code for America, which is primarily based out of the Bay, is doing tremendous work around this, and we work closely with them. Here in New York, I've actually testified to the city council about this idea of opening up data to be able for anyone, not just us, but for anyone to be able to make hyperlocal data sites about, not just about bills, about other sorts of issues. And actually, New York City is doing pretty well on this, as is San Francisco and some other cities. So there are groups, there are sort of informal hubs called the Open New York Forum that's working on this in New York, and that's definitely part of our vision of engagement. And there's other tools that are hyperlocal. Some of them are called Every Block, Localocracy, and there's a few others that I could mention. So, cool question.
Can I ask one of our guests to put you on the spot about the work that you did in Detroit, Michael, with asking your community of listeners to tell you what their biggest issue was, and they came back to you with the asthma example. Never mind. So, Michael Alcesser.
I'm Michael Alcesser. I'm the general manager of WDET in Detroit. We're a public radio station in the center of Detroit. And we did a large coordinated project with a bunch of great institutions. And what we did is we swarmed a neighborhood in Detroit that sits at the base of the largest border crossing in North America. There are more trucks that pass through Detroit and Windsor than any other border crossing. And we were asking them what could we cover in this area, and we wanted to do a large sort of crowdsourced information project that would have a mobile component to it as well. What came back were these issues and concerns that people had about the negative health impacts because of all of these trucks moving through unregulated truck routes. So they're supposed to travel along specific routes. We weren't sure what was going to come back. That's what they came back to us with. And then what we did is we developed a quick, cheap, like sub $10,000 mobile app using Civic Commons, where people could log in and report the location of a truck driving on an unregulated route, which would then drop that into a map automatically. And so we were able to collect in about 72 hours a couple dozen citizen-reported locations of these trucks that we could then take to Detroit city government. And one of the unexpected things that came out of the reporting was that it was not a typical good guy, bad guy narrative of bad truckers, unresponsive to the health needs of the citizens, some of that. But what also came out was that these truck routes that had been designed were absolutely impossible to use. They made no sense whatsoever. Some of them just physically didn't work for 18-wheelers. And so we had just this complete breakdown. And then when we looked at the regulation of this activity, we found that there was one person in the city of Detroit that was on staff to monitor this. And that same person is the person that you went to when you wanted to get a parade license, you wanted to rent a shelter for a picnic. And then they also, oversaw these truck routes and all the legal over-the-road trafficking through Detroit. So real complex. We were able to get more sunshine onto this, and we were able to put some pressure. This became part of the pressure that was put on the Detroit International Bridge Crossing, there's a private firm that owns the bridge, Matty Maroon. I'll leave it there. And this was part of the brief that went into the state's case for why they needed to amplify the pressure on Detroit International Bridge to complete the work. Yeah.
So we have a question from Twitter from @BenFranciscoM, who is asking, how can we as fundraisers help grantees who are less social media savvy use these types of tools?
I was hoping you were going to take first crack at that. Well, let's see. There's a lot of great lessons to be learned from what happened this January, where groups came together in a great coalition effort to defeat this harmful legislation, and the ways in which that a wide variety of different kinds of groups. There was news media, progressive blogs, there was and issue advocacy groups in DC, and also just internet activists from various online communities all came together and played a role. Shared information, held elected officials accountable, held the press accountable, and held the tech media accountable. And so looking at what some of the social media was around there with one of our sibling organizations, a nonprofit called Fight for the Future, that's a good sort of case study, I think, in what happened. I'd also looked at other projects of the Knight Foundation, is doing a lot of work of really sort of net native and very, very good at very sort of digital outreach. And right now, I think the general prevailing vibe is to just follow the best practices of social media in your own life, right? Which is just be passionate, right? Be excited about what you're doing, and share your excitement in a really genuine way, in a really straightforward way. And I think that'll be that's my social media mantra.
I was just going to say, I think one concrete way is to be tolerant and even encouraging of grantees using funds and time and money on communications, which is often where, we want to see really quick results, we want to see numbers, we want to see people served, and communications can feel a little fuzzy. But we know that there is an impact, and so be willing to fund communications.
Can I actually, this is completely outside my lane entirely. You should all take this with massive quantities of salt. But let me just say, there is an institutional prerogative right now to use social media, okay? There's money in it. There's a world of social media consultants. Any event has a Twitter hashtag, etc. Okay. There is an idea that social media is a way to get your message out. Also true, right? But let's talk about Twitter for a second, right? No one is going to want to follow a Twitter handle that essentially just like spouts out bureaucratic updates on organizational imperatives. And I feel like people think of social media as a tool to get your message out, but it's only a tool to get your message out if people want to read it. And people only will want to read it if there is some kind of genuinely authentic voice to it. Like an actual person like making jokes or talking about last night's Sunday night football game. I know that, and like that is so, I know it's ridiculous to think that like, oh, the Knight Foundation's official Twitter handle is going to be like, Peyton Manning's back, y'all. But why am I going to follow the Knight Foundation's handle if it doesn't do that? I just feel like there's been this tremendous proliferation of institutional voices on social media, all of which are going about it in this kind of very straightforward way in which like we will use our platform to get our message out. But I think there's a lot of room for like creativity and authenticity and voice and humor and jocularity and all of the kind of loose informality that makes the language of social media real and intimate to people that is being completely ignored by folks that are doing it in an institutional setting. That's my, like, again,
So
you could
it's
totally
really
ignore that.
important not only to do it, but also to do it well. That would be good. And I think that there are actually a couple of really important experts for nonprofits using social media. Beth Cantor, if you don't know of her, she's definitely a rock star in this field. Beth Cantor, and also Annie Leonard, who was famous for The Story of Stuff, and really was the first viral video star. She's still working on it, and her most recent effort is called The Story of Change, and she's going beyond just telling that story, but also mapping how you can become a change maker, and has got a really interesting invitation for everyone who watches her short film to also take a survey and become and self-identify as what kind of change maker you are. She also gives a particular, we did a panel together, and she was brilliant. The Twitter stream was amazing. But one of the things she said is, if you're going to tweet, don't use all 140 characters, because you're only as good as your network. There aren't that many people listening to you, but if the people who are listening to you retweet it, then you reach more people. You have to leave them a few characters to retweet your stuff.
Until about 4 years ago, I think it was Nightbird, had a box in which one could insert an address and instantly get the names of each representative and the community board, but this went from federal on down to local. And it disappeared about 3 years ago, and I've forgotten what the reason was. What is currently available on those lines? Because as I find people who are perhaps persuadable to become a little bit more involved, this was a remarkable resource.
My latest understanding is that recently there was an application by a couple of organizations to the Knight Foundation's News Challenge grant on data that was to rebuild and resuscitate precisely that ability. So the idea is that you want to give an address and get back everyone, federal, state, county, local, hyperlocal, like town. Yeah, I do actually. My best understanding is that it was the nonprofit called Open Plans, which is based here in New York, probably working with other folks in the open data movement. So it's amazing if you look at this very basic and necessary piece of infrastructure that we don't have this. We've got these machines that do almost everything, but I can't send you my address and get back a full list down to the local level. What we can do now, what I can do on, yes, on Open Government, you can enter an address now, and our database that we built will bring you down to state local officials. So we've got We've got federal level and then state legislators, higher and lower level state chambers. We're looking to get down to city and then get lower. But right now that doesn't exist. And also, even more importantly than the service, we don't have a database of everyone, right? You want a sortable, queryable database that you can get bulk access to get everyone. So that's a real funding opportunity right there. And I'll give you my card later and we can follow up. Not just for me also, but I'll loop you in with the guys who did that and the folks who did it.
So just to add to that, we had a website, we did it, 3-4 years ago, that did exactly that for New York City. And we sort of have shut it down in part because it's really, really hard. It's a difficult problem to solve. Geocoding an address, and this is something you can't get wrong. You can't tell somebody that your congressional representative, if they happen to live within 100 feet of a boundary line, is this person and not this other person. That's really, really hard. And it's also very, and I think what David was, it's a zip code doesn't do you any good. It's not zip code based. But David's point, I think, is spot on, that one of the things that is necessary here is making this data available and uniform, and it's shockingly not. It's just not. And that's why, God bless you guys for, going down and trying to do open Congress for cities, and I mean, the data nightmares you're going to try to untangle there.
By the way, I didn't have an opportunity. I forgot to mention during my presentation that, of course, we use DocumentCloud in opengovernment.org, and we'll continue to use it for city legislation, and it is a joy for our developers to work with, and it's awesome.
Well, there's different districts for every, I mean, there's a basic building block, but the boundaries for any particular representative is going to be different. You can get down to that level, but the problem is what are the boundaries for, city council? What are the problems for a school board district? They're all different, and you have to stack them up like a layer cake.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Hi. My name is Nora O'Brien-Surik. I'm with the John A. Hartford Foundation here in New York City. And I just want to thank you, each of you, for your presentations. It was just so incredibly informative, and I have learned a lot. And what you've helped me is to know what I don't know. And that's always something that I appreciate, is learning what I don't know. And that leads me to my question, is about education and the intellectual gap. You've talked about economic gap and racial gaps and inequalities and socioeconomic inequalities, but what about the educational inequalities and the intellectual inequalities in our nation? One of the things that you're offering is more information, and it's the intellectually curious who want more information. There are so many people in our country that don't want to think for themselves, or don't have the curiosity to really find out what the STEM root is, what the organic information is, and they want to get it from people such as Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh or other people who might not want to be dictated by the fact checkers. So what about that? How can we enable more people to understand more about what this country is about and what we have to offer? Our education system is really disintegrating. There's less money for teachers, there's less money for education, it's becoming less accessible to people, and there's not a lot of intellectual curiosity. You talk about those households that have incomes of less than $44,000, maybe they might have access to social media, but do they know what they should be learning or what they should be accessing?
Let me respond to that, because I actually, my experience has made me feel the opposite of that, of the embedded premise there. So I do a television show on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and it's 2 hours long, and we have done 40 minutes on the different tax treatment of debt and equity in the tax code and how that's made Bain possible. We've done 35 minutes on the minutia of the SOPA Act and things like that. And I get stopped by viewers of my show in Bed-Stuy, in Clinton Hill, on the F train, in every neighborhood in the city, by gypsy cab drivers, by bodega owners. And this is the facts about the demographic of my audience. And I say this giving away my own prejudices of who I thought would be the kind of person that would watch the show, and have found them to be destroyed by the actual experience of the people that do watch the show. And they are I mean, there are Columbia professors, and there are movers and painters and carpenters, and I'm now naming all different people that have come up to me to say, I watched the show. And I actually think that the lesson in some ways of something like Wikipedia, the lesson of the internet, the lesson of the fact that NPR is is an enterprise that's growing massively right now. It's one of the most vibrant media platforms out there, is that the amount of people that do have the curiosity you're talking about is far, far exceeds what our assumption is about who is out there. And it's never going to be everyone, because people lead extremely busy lives and chaotic lives and lives filled with challenges and tragedy and all these things. So that they're time constrained. There's a sum of time that people can spend, and that's a genuine problem. But the desire for information and the curiosity for it far, far, far surpasses, in my own personal experience of it, what I would have ever guessed or anticipated.
You know, I think that offers such a hopeful and positive point to end on. Maybe that should be the last word. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, panel.